In this video, there are rumors of a new version of Necromunda, and I'll tell you what I think they should do. I watched a video recently by Wellywood Wargaming called New Necromunda Edition Rumors Explained, which you should totally check out up here. Pachow. And I watched it because I hadn't really heard any Necromunda rumors recently. As a matter of fact, I hadn't really heard anything much about like new Necromunda recently at all, at least, from Games Workshop. There haven't been very many new releases for Necromunda that I've seen since last summer. So I've been wondering if they were going to keep that game around or, if it was just going to get war cried. If you don't know, Necromunda is a skirmish game from Games Workshop that takes place in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, but it's not Warhammer 40,000. Necromunda is actually the name of a planet in the segmentum solar area of the galaxy, and it's covered in these just unbelievably massive, huge hive cities that go way up into the sky, above the clouds and down into underground. Billions of people live in them. And the most famous, hive city being Hive Primus, which I assume is where the band is from. You generally play a small group from one of the kind of larger house gangs that are in the hives, like House Orlok or House Van Saar or House Escher or whatever, but there's all kinds of other groups that you can play as well. It originally came out in 1995, and I never got to play back then because I couldn't really afford all the models and the terrain and all that stuff at the time, even though the terrain was mostly cardboard. But I loved watching people play Necromunda at Gen Con every year. I'd sit and watch games kind of play out on these big, cool boards of terrain that people would build and then bring, back when Gen Con was still in Milwaukee, and much closer to my house, where Adepticon is now. And I was always fascinated by the different gangs and the verticality of the terrain. It wasn't usually just a flat area with some ruins like a lot of war games. It was more terrain, more better. But eventually, Games Workshop stopped making stuff for it, and then the community took over. There was a living rulebook document out there to download, and people kept playing and kit bashing and making crazy terrain builds. And, no game is ever dead when there's still some folks out there who care. And it was, out there, getting played, being enjoyed. And then 2017 came along, and GW decided to bring Necromunda back with an all-new starter box called Necromunda Underhive. It included a gang of House Escher models and a gang of, House Goliath models, all new plastic sculpts with tons and tons of detail. And it came with a flat board. Some scatter terrain, some doors, but that was pretty much about it. A totally flat, non-vertical play space. And I'll admit, I was pretty bummed. I remembered back to those amazing boards I'd sit and watch games on, at Gen Con in the late 90s, and this new kind of board gamified version really bummed me out. However, they did eventually release rules for playing on more vertical terrain, and they even started producing some pretty amazing terrain kits. And they released some of the best model kits, in my opinion, in the entire Games Workshop line. Even if you have no interest in Necromunda at all, if you like kit bashing even a little bit, then you owe it to yourself to at least get a House Orlok box and probably a House Caudor box too. There's so much that you can do with those two boxes alone when it comes to kit bashing. Anyway, they released more and more models and a few more starter boxes, over the years, like Hive War and Hive Secundus, and so many books. I mean, the book thing was really egregious, right? I personally felt like there were way too many of them. And with so many books comes so many rules. Now, like I said, I own a lot of Necromunda stuff because the models and the terrain are really great. Escher, Goliath, Caudor, Orlok, Van Saar, Dalak, Palanites, Hive Scum, Corpse Grinders, Redemptionists, Ambots. I own all those kits and just like no notes. Mwah. But I never really thought about playing much until a few years ago when I was going to try getting into it with my friend Sam Lenz and my other friend Raven from Gravenly Studio. And we were going to play on Raven's amazing looking Necromunda boards, just top notch. I built and I painted a Cawdor gang, and then I completely bounced off the rules. Now, if you don't know what I mean when I say bounced off the rules, I mean, I was interested enough to build and paint like, 9 or 10 Cawdor gangers. And, then I got some books and all that kind of stuff, and I started reading the rules, and then I just pretty much quit. Like the whole concept of bouncing off of something kind of, I think, comes from back in the day. I was a web designer, and you would look at your analytics, and they had something called a bounce rate. And that meant that somebody came to the website and then never went any further in, and they just left. That was the bounce rate. It's like they got there and went like, nope, that's not for me. And they took off. That's where bouncing comes from. And I bounced off the rules pretty hard. The rules are very, very dense. And there's so much going on. The rules for Necromunda make 10th edition 40K look kind of streamlined, at least in my opinion. Understand, I'm not saying that Necromunda is a bad game. I'm just saying that for me, and many, many people that I've talked to, there's a lot of unneeded crunch in those rules. So since then, I haven't really thought much about Necromunda other than to make, cool kit bashes and great terrain boards with the physical stuff that they produce. Our friends over at One Page Rules have an add-on to their Grimdark Future Firefight skirmish game called Gang Wars, which is far more my speed and works really well with much of the Necromunda stuff. And these days, there's a surprising amount of Necromunda stuff that's actually still in stock at the Games Workshop website, so things are mostly fine. But it's been nearly 10 years since the relaunch of Necromunda with that Underhive box. That would be about 3 entire editions of Warhammer 40,000. Just think about that. And so when I, watched Wellywood's video about potential new Necromunda, I thought, well, yeah, I bet to Games Workshop it's about time, right? Now, the big question is this. If they make a new edition of Necromunda, will it actually be new? New rules, like drastically new? New models? Even if they really don't need to make new sculpts, at least in my opinion? Or is this going to be another kind of sort of update, sort of change new starter box release? Personally, I'd like to see the rules get much more streamlined. I still want to be able to build my gangs with tons of granularity like you can now. You get to buy guns, specific guns and equipment and armor and all kinds of things to make your gangers uniquely yours. But I'd like the overall rules when you actually play the game to be easier to use. If you look at a rule system like Trench Crusade, you still have all the agency of building your forces pretty much however you want, with tons of choices of weapons and equipment and such. But the actual rules, the play loop, is simpler and more elegant than the intense crunch of Necromunda. The one thing I really don't want is for them to go down the kill team route, right? Like getting rid of all the gang building rules and just making individual boxes that are teams. That would generally kill the overall feeling of Necromunda. Even if they did streamline the rules of Necromunda and make it, faster and easier to play, which I would enjoy, like I said, I'd still really want the ability to build my gang like the way I wanted. Let me get crunchy with gang creation and then make the games faster and easier, and then let me get crunchy again with the post-game process when I'm playing a campaign. Crunch, easy, crunch makes for a better game, again, in my opinion, than crunch, 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 or the kill team recipe, which seems to be kind of easy, crunch, easy. At that point, Things don't feel narrative, they just feel like too many rules just for the sake of it during gameplay. The thing that's great about spending more time on the crunchy aspects of building your team, or warband, or gang, or whatever, is that it allows you to identify more with your models as you kind of come up with them, right? They become your people, and generally the creation part, that part sort of at the front, is something you only do once per team. If they did drastically streamline the rules, then what would happen to the folks who actually like things the way they are now? Well, there are still folks out there playing the old living rule set from 1995, so I suspect that people who prefer the current iteration would just end up doing that sort of thing, right? Like, it's not ideal, right? But I doubt that GW would make both a streamlined version of Necromunda and keep the current version as well. Necromunda doesn't make them enough money to justify it, I suspect. And they'll do whatever makes them the most money. Honestly, they could save money by not redoing any of the current models. I think that the current models are great, and redoing a bunch of them will cost tons of cash for both design time and, new molds. Both of those things are very expensive. Instead, they could just make new stuff in plastic that they don't currently have available and make sure to make it attractive to kit bashers. Like I said earlier, I've bought a lot of Necromunda models for a guy that doesn't actually play Necromunda. Making that stuff attractive to kit bashers just seems like a good business move. Honestly, I'd be amazed if they actually decided to drastically change the rules to make things more streamlined in Necromunda. I mean, look at the last 4 or 5 versions of Warhammer 40,000. Have there been any drastic changes? Not really. Every 3 years they make some tweaks here and there and change a little bit of this and that, but it's basically the same game, and then everybody needs to buy new books, right? That's the business plan. And with Necromunda being one of their smaller properties, I doubt they'll spend much money or time to change things drastically. Hopefully, they'll just keep the models that they have now in stock so that I can keep getting them for kit bashing for other games. So we'll probably see a new Necromunda starter box because, well, it's been a while, right? And maybe they'll tweak the rules just enough to require people to have to buy new books. That seems to be generally their game plan. If changes happen beyond that, something a little bit more drastic, I'll either be pleasantly or horrifically surprised. But I guess that we'll, have to wait and see. Maybe next summer if I was a betting man. What do you think? Am I way off base? Does Necromunda actually need an update? What do you think is going on with all of these rumors? Let us all know down in the comments below. And if you like videos like this, I would appreciate some depressmentation of the like button or the hype button if you're on mobile. They always do help out the channel. And if you want to hear more about videos like this every single Friday, you can always hit the subscribe button while you're down there as well. It's free. Thanks for watching. Coming up in mid-June, come visit your Uncle Adam and play all kinds of demos and miniatures games. Take some classes from some of the world's best painters, and just have fun at a little wargaming expo in central Wisconsin. It's the Tabletop Minions Expo, June 13th and 14th, 2026 in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. It's a small event with game demos, some painting classes, some vendors, and some fun. If you run some games as a game master, then your attendance is free. All the info you need is at www.tabletopminions.org/tmx. Link in the description below. Hope to see you there.